welcome to Research Meets Reality, a series where we discuss current business trends and we invite Aberdeen analysts to share data-driven insights from their research that help working professionals do their jobs better. In this edition of our show, we're going to talk about the current state of cybersecurity, and we'll explore what the data says about current challenges, trending technologies, and the cybersecurity skills gap, in addition to how to minimize risk if you are out there today trying to secure your environment. Today's guest is Derek Brink. He's a Vice President and Research Fellow at Aberdeen Strategy Research, and he focuses on topics such as cybersecurity and IT governance, risk management, and compliance. So Derek, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your area of coverage?
Hi, Peter. Thank you for having me, and you do great work here. And hi, everybody listening. Yeah, so I'm Derek Brink. I'm focusing on cybersecurity and risk and governance and compliance. It's a broad space, but I get to cover all of it. I'm very lucky that way. And I've been doing this for about 14 years, I think it is now. Before that, I was on the vendor side, though. I worked on in product management, product marketing, corporate strategy for many places. The place I was for 8 years before becoming an analyst was RSA Security. So that's my background on both sides of the table, so to speak, the vendor side and on the analyst side.
And one of the interesting things about you, Derek, is you teach a class at Harvard. It's all about cybersecurity. It's called How to Assess and Communicate Risk in Information Security. So in your scholarly opinion, as an adjunct professor there at that very respected institution, do most organizations get a passing cybersecurity grade or not?
You know, for me, I'm a hard grader, I think. I think I would say no, but let me try to explain why I say that. If you take the perspective of the people who are allocating the resources, the senior leadership team, I think they would say this, that they don't yet see a clear connection between the activities of cybersecurity and the results that we're getting. And let me give you a few points to support why I say that. Worldwide, companies are investing tens of billions of dollars every year on cybersecurity, and it's been increasing. It's projected still to increase, even with the economy. And the number of cybersecurity solution providers number literally in the thousands. It's more than 3,000 vendors in the space, according to the VCs who track that. It just means there's just a superabundance of technical controls and countermeasures, even with all the M&A activity. It underscores the importance of the problem, right? But it also underscores that there's just a lot of choice in the market, and they've already bought a lot of these solutions. Most vendors, most companies have multiple vendors in their shop. And at the same time, we've got regulatory requirements that the senior leadership team is certainly aware of. And for data security and data privacy, they're numerous, they're complex, and some of them are starting to have real teeth in terms of the fines and penalties and so on. And yet, and this is, all that is what they know. And at the same time, the attackers are consistently outperforming the defenders. And I'll give you two examples. One is this notion of, it's called attacker dwell time. And that's kind of a nerdy thing, but the definition is the time between when an attacker compromises our systems and when we, the defenders, find out about it. That difference is called the dwell time. And there's a well-publicized thing, Mandiant. They're now part of FireEye, but they've been doing this for, 10, 11 years. They publish dwell times from their empirical investigations, and it's been improving. The good news is it's been improving. In the beginning, a decade ago, was 416 days was the median. Can you believe that? 416 days, over a year, from when we're compromised until when we find out about it. The most recent one that I can recall was about 24 days, so that's like 3 to 4 weeks. Yeah, so it's improved from over a year to just 3 to 4 weeks, but still, if they're faster than us, then they win. So, and about 20% of attacker compromises, even in the most recent one, they go undetected for 1 to 5 years. So that's a big problem. And then the other one, of course, is data breaches. It's just an example we all know from headlines, and they just continue to go kind of unabated. And public disclosures are required, of course, by law. And we just see tons and tons of them. And that's a pretty big problem. So to answer your question as best I can, to get a passing grade with me, my view is that we'd like to see that the increased investments that we're making are really not only in security but also compliance requirements. They're resulting in fewer incidents on an absolute basis. I think that's not the case. I think probably the best we could say is that we're seeing fewer incidents because of these investments than if we didn't make them. So a slower rate of increase, if you want to look at it that way. So I suppose it's up to you how you'd grade it. But for me, it's like, we can do better.
Yeah, and so your students are at Harvard, so you would expect them to be some of the best and brightest out there and business leaders as well. But it sounds like they're still having difficulty as well. So can you tell us a little bit more about where the knowledge gaps exist and what do people know and what don't they know before coming to your class? And you kind of outlined it a little bit in your prior question, but what are some of their mistakes that they're making currently?
Yeah, this is a really good question. The students in my class tend to come from technical roles, as do many people in cybersecurity and IT, and they're trying to get a graduate degree and better themselves, and expand their knowledge and advance their careers. And so they generally bring a ton of professional experience and a lot of diverse insights. They're from all over the world and all different industries. So it makes the learning environment really great. It's one of the reasons I like it so much. In terms of gaps, it might be surprising to you and the people listening, but everyone has some professional relationship with risk. But I would say that most of them and most of the people in our industry, I would say many vendors, even analysts, they don't really think about risk properly. So there's a language problem. The very definition of risk. It's common, for example, in our industry, that the term threats is used interchangeably with risk, and vulnerabilities and exploits are used interchangeably with risk, like they're synonyms. But that's just not correct. There's no confusion about the definition. It's how likely is something to happen in a given period of time. It's kind of a frequency thing. And if it does happen, what's the business impact? So we need to talk about likelihood and impact both if we're talking about risk. And we can't just say, for example, is phishing a risk? The answer is, well, really no. Phishing is an exploit. It's an exploit of a vulnerability, which is a human, and it can lead to bad consequences like a data breach. So it's okay to say what's the risk of phishing attacks, and by that you would mean how likely are they to happen in say an analyzed basis, and if it does happen, what's the range of impact, and is that acceptable or not, right? So, but even the language itself, this is the only reason we're here is risk, and we don't even have the language quite right. There's also a measurement problem. How do we measure risk? And I personally like to quantify things, and a lot of things we do right now that are not quantification at all. We've got red, yellow, and green, and headlines, and sort of random statistics. And there's also a communication problem. We kind of bridge the gap between the technical side and the business side, and people are still maturing and evolving in that sense. And in many ways, that's why they take the course. So if there are gaps, I think it has to do with risk and the language, the measurement, the communication, things like that.
Okay, and you mentioned that people are always a weak spot in security, and your research dives into the effects of these security failures and examines some of their causes. So what should we know about your research about the causes and consequences of these data breaches that you research?
Okay, that's a fair question. It's a very broad space. We do know, I guess, if we want to just stick with data breaches as a thing to focus on, let's do that. On the cause side, this wouldn't be my research. It would be, industry research that we all benefit from. For example, the annual work that Verizon does with the data breach investigation report series. They've been doing this probably for 12 years or so. And they tell us, they investigate actual incidents and also confirm data breaches. And they've taught us that vast majority of these, like 80, 90%, begin typically with phishing attacks, and then compromise user credentials. And then once you have compromised user credentials that give you access for a variety of paths, there's different, they call it the attack cycle, the attack kill chain, sometimes people call it. So there's a variety of paths, but ultimately they lead to unauthorized access to data. So causes, are varied, but the root cause, starts often with phishing and compromised credentials. You asked about the effect side too, didn't you, on the consequences side? So I talked already about the measurement problem. Yeah. So this there is an annual cost of a data breach study that's been done for many years. IBM Security is now the sponsor of that. And they initially talked about the average cost per record as sort of a metric. That's because, again, there's a measurement problem. That's a terrible thing. The average is an awful thing to use because the distribution of cost is not, nice and bell-shaped curve. It really looks like a ski slope. So if you're going to use any single number, use the median, for goodness sakes. But people think it's simple. I just don't find it very helpful. It's kind of clickbait, B2B marketing stuff, in my view. The best work I've seen in that regard is by a boutique firm called Scientia, Cyentia, I believe it's spelled. There's guys who spun out of Verizon, actually, and they did a really nice analysis of a massive data set from Advisen, which is a cyber insurance company. So they looked at cyber insurance payouts, and their analysis, I think, is some of the better work that's been done, talking about the consequence side. So, I forget now the exact way you phrased your initial question, but there's the cause side, which is there's a pattern. It tends to begin with phishing and compromised credentials, and then ultimately gain access. And on the consequence side, we know it's bad. We see the headlines, but the headlines that are really a small fraction. Most data breaches are pretty small. I think looked at an analysis of more than 10 years of public disclosures, and the median number of records when it's a record-oriented breach was about 2,000, and 75% of records-oriented breaches were 10,000 records or less. So these mega breaches, like recently, as we're recording this, I think it was T-Mobile had another data breach and was 37 million customers. So that would be the long tail side of that curve. So that's an exception, but those are the ones that make the headlines. But yeah, they're all sizes.
Okay, let's switch gears a little bit. I talked a little bit about the causes of breaches and their effects, but you mentioned a lot of our audience, they are from the tech world. So let's talk a little bit more about technology. So based on your research, which specific technologies make a big difference in reducing the risk profile of an organization? And is there an order of technologies that a business should layer in their environment to protect themselves?
That's a fair question, Peter. I mean, I just a minute ago, we said there's more than 3,000 vendors in this space, and now you want me to tell you the exact technologies in the exact order. So it's a bit of a tall order, right?
Not an exact order. Yeah, it is, but
it's kind of a holy grail. Everybody wants to know that.
Can do.
Yeah. People want to know that. Some years ago, there was this movement towards, I think it started in Australia, the Defense Security Division or something like that in Australia had the top 5 controls, and that sort of evolved to something called the top 20 critical security controls. It started out in SANS, S-A-N-S, but now it's been taken over. It's managed. This list is managed by the Center for Internet Security, CISSP. I think it's currently version 8. So there's folks out there who try to say, look, there's a lot of controls out there. These are the top 20, and so they answer that question directly. I look at lists like that personally, and I tend to abstract it just a little bit more. So in terms of the 20 technologies, I sort of group them together a little bit in terms of higher level capabilities that we need. So for example, one capability, if you look at that list, boils down to know what you have, sort of understand the assets that you have, what's your inventory. And another grouping, if you will, is keep the things you have properly configured and patched and up to date. Back up and protect your data, manage your users and their accounts and their access to enterprise resources. So those are the kind of higher level groupings that I would do for that top 20 list. You might choose to implement different specific technologies to achieve those things. But for me, that higher level grouping, it's just good basic stuff. It's a synthesis of best practices that are generated by smart people. And if I could just point to people who are looking forward, what's happening, there's a group called the FAIR Institute. FAIR stands for Factor Analysis of Information Risk. And this is founded by a guy named Jack Jones, who I personally think is terrific. But he's more recently introduced on this measurement problem we were talking about, an attempt. It's called the Controls Analytics Model to try to answer this question. The spirit of your question is, which controls are most valuable? We've got a lot of them. Which are the ones that, you've heard of the 80-20 rule or the Pareto principle? It's usually 20% of your controls probably give you 80% of the benefit in terms of reducing your risk. So he's got this thing called control analytics model to try to measure and quantify that. And I'm really excited by that movement. Again, it's just a pointer to more maturity in our industry.
Okay, just a couple more questions. So speaking a little bit more to technologies and processes, one topic that's kind of buzzworthy recently is the concept of zero trust. And I know a lot of your research hinges around this concept. So can you speak a little bit more to zero trust and why it's important and why it's gaining momentum currently?
Yeah, sure. It is. It is on a lot of people's minds these days. I would say that for me anyway, I've been around a little while. This trend has been developing at least over 20 years. The traditional approach was, we authenticate to the corporate network, and once we're in, we kind of can move around freely. And then we came in over a VPN, and then we could move around freely. The idea was that there's a perimeter, around the corporate network, and sort of the bad guys are on the outside, and we want to keep them out. And once the good people are in, they're in and they're trusted. So that's just less and less viable these days. We just don't have this concept of a perimeter because we've got increasingly a workforce that's remote and hybrid. We've got the apps and data that are in the cloud. They're not, within the corporate data center necessarily. So we've just got this change, and it was certainly accelerated over the last few years by the global pandemic. So this whole idea of outside versus inside is just not there anymore, which is why this concept of zero trust is really accelerated lately. And the principle of zero trust is basically that access is always conditional. It's not just like we log in and then we're good. It's always conditional on demonstrating and sustaining that we have got the level of assurance or trust that's in line with the policies that have been set. So it's not just authenticating once and then roaming around. It's always kind of consistently, continuously being evaluated, kind of under the covers. We don't want to create undue friction for you and me as we try to do things. So we don't want speed bumps and that kind of thing. But they're constantly evaluating whether our access is legit. So that's the super high level idea. If you ask 20 people, you'd probably get 20 different answers, but I think that captures the spirit of it. Oh, did you want me to talk about
another
technology? Because I didn't answer your question. I didn't. I'm sorry, Peter. I didn't answer you about what do I see in the research. If you want me to, I'd be happy to say that too. Sorry.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit more about your research in zero trust and what?
Yeah, it was quite interesting. Yeah, thanks, Peter. It was remarkable actually when we asked companies about zero trust. Almost all of them, over 90%, said we've got some zero trust initiative that is active and funded, and I think that's remarkable because everybody has a list of 99 things they'd like to do, but how many make the cut of what actually gets funded, right? It's a small number, and zero trust made the list for almost everybody. So that really was eye-opening for me. It is, even though we might not all agree on what it is, everybody's interested in doing something in that regard. And I also, in that study, I'll just make this point, we asked questions about, where did you start first, and then what did you do next, or what do you plan to do next? Kind of a beginning point and a sequencing of it. And we looked at really just 6 high-level areas to keep it simple. Like, what are the areas? Like users and their identities, devices, network connections, applications data, those kind of things. And when you ask those just 6 things, I'm a mathy guy. The way that you can combine those 6 things in different orders is 6 factorial. That's 720. If you remember from high school or college, math. And there was just no pattern on the 720. It was just all over the place. But here's ultimately the good news. When you do some grouping, there were 2 patterns that did emerge. One grouping is users and devices and network connections. I personally think of that as kind of an outside-in kind of focus. It's a logical thing to me. You want to start with you and me, working remotely and trying to access data. So we want to look at our device. Is it trusted and up to date? And is it our identity and our network connections, good and secure? So that makes a logical sense to me. The other one, not quite as high, but still high, strong number 2, in terms of starting point was the back end. It's totally logical to me to start with the crown jewels. What's your most valuable resources you're trying to protect? So your apps and data, and that was for almost as many, but not quite the starting point. So if you look at it that way, those are the two ways that companies seem to be getting started with zero trust. It's a multi-year journey. It's not a product that you buy. It's a initiative that you embrace and kind of an architecture that you build. But those are the two starting points, which I thought was pretty neat to find from the research.
All right, and speaking of research, much has been made of a cybersecurity skills gap currently. A lot of smaller businesses that don't have in-house resources or a lot of funding, they're having trouble finding security expertise. So what does the research say about that, and what can companies do if they don't really have the resources to find talented people to hire?
Yeah, we did do a pretty big global project on this not that long ago, and we did kind of confirm this gap. Kind of a quick and dirty calculation. There's more complex ways to do this, but we're literally talking 3,000 companies globally who told us this is how many roles in cybersecurity I have now. These are how many roles I currently have open. And so just by definition, that's the gap. These are the roles I have open and currently are unfilled. And when you look at it across all these 2,800 companies, it worked out to be about 32%. So in other words, the roles that we'd like to have filled, 32% of them are going unfilled currently. So that's pretty big. That's substantial. That was just from our particular measurement. And again, there's more complex models that you can try to build to measure that. But so what are they doing? There's definitely a focus on the people side. On the people side, there's a movement towards, traditionally the cybersecurity pros is, let's face it, has been predominantly male, and it's aging. It's actually older, white males traditionally, and that's changing. So there's a movement towards getting more diversity, and so more women and minorities in roles. Also, not just from IT backgrounds, for looking at other backgrounds. People are hiring now. Companies are hiring based on aptitude and attitude and curiosity. Companies realize that they can train people for the tech skills, but they need to have the right kind of mindset and curiosity and so on to be problem solvers and so on. So that's a change on the people side. There's also the technology side. More use of managed services, for example. We don't necessarily have to have those people in-house. We can use services for that. So some cloud-based services are popular. Managed detection and response is one example that comes to mind. So there's also, technologies, when we do buy them, are more and more including, machine learning and AI type capabilities that sort of, remove the drudgery kind of work that tech pros have to do, and automate that, and frees up time for the people we do have to work on higher value added things. So there's a number of things that are going on. Most companies are doing some combination of those.
You brought up the topic of machine learning and AI, and that's a huge topic not only in security but throughout the business world. And the time of this recording, ChatGPT is everywhere in the news, and then even in Spiceworks, which is the community that I'm from. So there was a very interesting article about how these malicious actors are going to adopt artificial intelligence to automate their cyber attacks and to evade the defenses that organizations put in place. So do you think the future of AI is going to impact cybersecurity positively in the ways that you talked about, automating some of the defenses, but it's also going to enable some of these malicious actors to more effectively automate their attacks too? So what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a really smart question. And I've mostly only been exposed to here's what the defenders, the good guys are doing. The only immediate thing that came to my mind thinking about how the attackers would use it is, we talked about phishing being so predominant, right? More than 90% of confirmed data breaches, start with a phishing attack. And so using current capabilities of ChatGPT and others to write phishing that we can, most of us relate to the experience of seeing something and just knowing that it's phishing because it's badly written in some way. It just stands out. But ChatGPT is pretty good at writing stuff that it could be, for example, in the, aimed at you in the style of your manager, and it would be much more plausible for you to believe it and click on it or provide information. So that's the only thing that immediately came to my mind. I haven't thought thoroughly about all the other ways they could use it, but even that one alone is a problem because, again, the start of the attack chain for data breaches often starts with phishing and fooling humans to do things they shouldn't. So there's that. I actually had a chance. Can I tell you this quick story, Peter? Yeah, hyper-targeting.
Yeah, sure.
And I've been trying recently to get access to ChatGPT, and I was always shut out. I just kept getting it's at capacity right now. But my manager actually had made an account some time ago, so I was talking with him about it, and he, this Mike Locke was appeared on these series before, so he said, "I'll log in and I'll enter your question." So I had him ask the question to ChatGPT. Can you, again, talking about data breaches, can you write a justification for an incremental investment in cybersecurity controls that are designed to protect against a data breach, and write this for the consumption by the senior management team in the buying organization? And it came back with a beautifully written, concise 4-paragraph thing. Just again, the language was good and well done. There was an opening paragraph and a closing paragraph that kind of summarized. But the meat, this is what I find humorous almost. The meat, paragraph 2, was really, to me, it's just plagiarized. The average cost of a data breach is 4 million from the Larry Ponemon and IBM Security study that it seems to be very prevalent out there. I think it's bad analysis, as I've already said, but that's what it kind of plagiarized and regurgitated in its nice way. And then the next paragraph of any substance was, to me, basically it invoked the free market argument, which is, hey, your customers, if you take good care of their data and you don't, cause them to have a data breach and violate their privacy and cause them all kinds of problems with identity and whatever, if you take good care of it, they're going to trust you more, and that's going to benefit you over the long term. If you don't take care of it, they're probably going to leave you. And I think the studies have shown that's not true, that when there is a data breach, that customers don't tend to leave really as much as that, but it was kind of a free market argument, kind of a qualitative thing. So my point of all this story is that it was beautifully done, but I think the level of maturity or goodness or sophistication in that response is pretty low. And I guess it just reflects what's out there right now. So it kind of brings us full circle to what I said at the beginning. We're maturing as an organization, and we're learning how to talk more properly about risk and measure it better and communicate it better. And right now, ChatGPT is just reflecting what it sees out there, which is not that high of a level, as I was saying from the beginning. I found it kind of amusing. I don't think we're going to be out of jobs anytime soon, Peter. That's what I think.
Okay.
Maybe one day.
That's what I wanted to hear. Thank you, Derek.
But yes, not just yet.
It's very comforting coming from you.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Just one more question. So we talked about technological change. A lot of things are advancing very quickly, but in the security world, things change, but many things remain the same. So in your long career in security, what are some of the things that have remained constant? And maybe let's sum up this conversation by revisiting some of the foundational aspects of the key takeaways that you want our listeners to leave this conversation.
That's a very good thing to end on. Some of the things that don't change, there's things that are just perennial, evergreen kind of concepts, and people do really understand these. So, for example, there's this thing referred to as the CIA triad. It stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So confidentiality or privacy, it just means that unauthorized people shouldn't get access to stuff, or only authorized people should get access to things. Integrity means that things shouldn't change. You can't make unauthorized changes to things. It should be the same unless somebody authorized to make a change made the change. And availability, we all know, it's supposed to be available for us to use, and non-availability is a problem. Unplanned downtime is a problem. So the CIA triad's still there, very much part of how people think about security. The concept of least privilege, kind of a need to know kind of idea. That's very much so. That's very much what zero trust is about. By the way, since we talked about that, periodic attestation is a term of art. Attestation just means you periodically review. Do the right people have the right access to the right things? Is Peter's access appropriate? Or maybe you had a previous job and we didn't remove the access to those things that you no longer need for your current job. So the attestation process would show that, and you'd have the access that you need, but not the access you don't, and things like that. So those kind of things that traditional are still there and very strong, which is great. What positive things that have changed I've seen over my time, for example, used to be I feel it used to be a focus primarily on protection, try to prevent bad things from happening. And some years ago, there was a realization that you just can't be successful. You can't prevent things 100% of the time. And there's asymmetry in the market. The bad guys only have to be right once, right? And we have to be right all the time. So that move to a shift to balance our approach to include the ability to detect and respond and recover from things. So we still invest in protection, but also we have capabilities now to detect, respond, and recover. So that's a very positive change. And I think, we're starting to see a shift, and I've been talking about this throughout, but it's not a question of are we secure or how much security do we have. That's really the wrong question, because we're never secure. You can't eliminate all risk. But when we start to focus on risk, what could happen, how likely is that, what's the impact, and how much risk is acceptable. So this idea of managing to an acceptable level of risk, there's increased focus and momentum behind that, and I think it's very positive. And personally, I try to do what I can to contribute to that sort of conversation in the market as well.
All right, Derek, thank you very much for your time and all of these insights, and just describing a lot of your research and external research and helping our listeners understand what they can do to secure their environments. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks, everybody.
All right, and we'll see you guys next time on the next edition of Research Meets Reality.